Hi, so today I'm going to be continuing my series of the ABCs of HOAs, and we're going to be talking about the very important subject of special assessments. It's important to understand this because it's going to, in most condos that I know of, at some point, there might become a need for a special assessment. And what is that actually? So, what happens in that condo association will generally have some reserves that they set aside for some major fixes, major expenditures that need to happen. Say all of the roofs need to be repaired, or the decks and balconies and things like that. So that may come up that there's a major repair that's needed, but the association might not have enough reserves to cover that, or might not want to completely use up all of their reserves just for that one project. And so because of that, there may become a need for what's called a special assessment. So your normal monthly dues are also called assessments. So there will be monthly assessments for HOAs. And then there will be a special assessment that has to do with a special case. So makes sense. So here are some examples of why there might be a need for a special assessment. There are, first of all, the balcony repairs or upgrades, and I'll be actually going into more detail in this in a future video. Roof replacement, that can be a huge one. It doesn't have to happen often, but when it does, it can actually be quite expensive to replace an entire roof, just because usually an association building or buildings, there might be quite a lot. And so that's going to be pretty costly. Exterior painting when that happens, and that needs to be done every so often just to make sure that you maintain the exterior, partly for just the appearance, partly because you want to make sure that everything is sealed well, so that when it does rain, like we've been having recently, that there are not going to be a lot of leaks or failures in moisture barrier. And then any other infrastructure. So there may be plumbing, just this has to do with the common plumbing. There may be the water heaters. In my association, we did the water heaters a few years back, and that was about $40 or $50,000. Not a small expense. Elevators, if those need to be updated or changed out. Landscaping, if you're going to be, there's a big push nowadays to try to go more toward the water efficient landscaping. And so that takes some cost. So there could be various things that in terms of just the general infrastructure that might need to be taken care of. Also water damage or mold issues. If there's anything, whether it be because of the roof, whether it because of windows, etc., if there is any significant water damage or mold issues to be taken care of, that might need a special assessment. Most of these, as you can see, are kind of problems and things that need to be addressed. Sometimes I'll just put in there that there are also occasionally times when an association may choose to do a special assessment, so they can just upgrade maybe one of the common amenities, whether that be the exercise room or a recreation room, and just to do some general upgrades to them. So, or add some new amenities. So that may also be a need for a special assessment. That's, I would say, a little less common, just because people don't like special assessments, so they try to avoid them and end up doing them just when it's necessary, rather than just to be able to upgrade the building itself. Here's an example of the reserve study. I did cover this a bit in another document, in another video on HOA documents. Basically, this is an example of the findings and recommendations that you may find in a reserve study. Reserve study is something that is done by a third-party company, and they come in and they calculate out all the major capital expenditures, the main parts of the building and the common areas that may need to be replaced or updated over the coming 30 years. They come up with a number with that, and then do an assessment of, well, what are the reserves currently? And then they come up with a percentage. So as you can see here, it says the reserve fund strength for this particular community is 43.2%. That falls within here the medium category or the fair category, which leads to a medium risk of special assessment. So this is a complex where It's not necessarily that they're going to have a special assessment anytime soon, but there is some risk that if there is some major expenditure that comes up, there's a medium amount of risk that they will actually need a special assessment to be able to take care of those things. So this has to do with the special assessment process. By statute, HOA boards of directors are allowed to do special assessment of the membership up to 5% of the current fiscal year's budgeted gross expenses without approval or without membership approval, regardless of any limitations that might be found in the governing documents. So regardless of how your CC&Rs are set up, a lot of times they will actually, it will actually look like this, where they say, well, board of directors, they can do that special assessment as long as it's less than 5% or up to 5% of the whole budgeted gross expenses for 1 year. There is an exception for an emergency special assessment if there's something that really, for sake of safety and health, needs to happen right away and there's no choice. That also can happen. But other than that, if there's a special assessment over 5%, then the boards have to seek membership approval. So just to keep in mind, all of the homeowners are part of the membership of the HOA. I mean, it's a homeowner association. So it doesn't have to do with the tenants or the people who live there. It has to do with who owns the property and has a percentage stake in the whole association. Regardless of anything to the contrary, in an association's governing documents, special assessments are approved by a majority of a quorum of the membership. So quorum means that you have to have over 50% of the vote owners. So at least more than 50% of the owners need to participate in the vote to begin with. And then of the people who voted, a majority is enough to be able to have a special assessment done. There are some CC&Rs, older ones, where they might look for some kind of a super majority, like a 60%, 2/3, or 75% of the majority of the quorum. That's been changed. So regardless of what's in the CC&Rs, this is the process by which HOAs in California would act in terms of the special assessment. So what happens when a special assessment is levied? Well, first thing is that the assessment may be fixed per unit or adjusted based on unit size. You'll find the latter is more common, where maybe somebody who has a 2-bedroom is already paying more HOA dues than somebody who has a studio or 1-bedroom. And then when it comes to special assessments, they may pay a bigger portion of it, because the idea is that their percentage of ownership is higher, the more they will be more theoretically they enjoy more of the property. So that's why it makes sense that the special assessment can be adjusted. Sometimes I have seen complexes where they've actually had it fixed so that every unit pays exactly the same. It just really depends on what the board chooses to do. The board may also choose to offer payment options for owners so that they can do one-time payments or spread over multiple years. And usually that will have a deadline. So it'll say maybe over 2 years or 3 years or 5. That will have to be something that is set. It's not, but it's sometimes nice if they're able to do that in terms of, just making it easier. If the special assessment is expensive, I've seen some that go up to $25,000, $30,000 in one shot. If that happens, it's a lot more difficult for somebody to pay that in at one time. There also may be options that some associations may actually offer assistance to those who may have a financial hardship, and or maybe somebody who's on a fixed income and has lived in a unit for many years but doesn't really have that ability to pay a big chunk. So there may be some ways to be able to offer assistance. In conclusion, I would just say be sure to review the reserves to get an indication of the likelihood of a special assessment in the future. That goes back to that reserve study that I mentioned. So it doesn't say that you have to have a special assessment, but it at least gives you an idea of what the risk is, and that way you can make sure that you're not caught off guard. Number 2, I would say HOA boards really need to keep track of maintenance and plan accordingly. Ideally, these reserve studies actually talk about how many years of life are remaining on each element, whether it be how many years of life does the roof have or the painting have, and when do you think you need to do an exterior painting. So it's really advisable for an HOA board to keep track of that and to hopefully try to plan for it. There are many times when, and I do live in an older building, it's pretty difficult to try to, um, do regular maintenance. It's kind of the building was built in the 70s, and so it's sometimes kind of like the whack-a-mole game where you're just trying to deal with all the different problems that are coming up. So, but ideally, if possible, to be able to keep track of that and plan, that's always better. Okay? Third, I would say make sure that if you are not on the board, that you attend the board meetings whenever possible, read minutes and newsletters so that, again, you're not caught unaware, because usually the special assessments don't just come up all of a sudden. It's generally going to be something that is known, that people are talking about, that we're having, that the board is having to get bids on, all of that before really getting to the point of doing a special assessment. And then number 4, just know that a special assessment may cause problems with financing. Not always, but if it's a pretty hefty amount and the lender might look at that and say, well, we're concerned about, a lot of deferred maintenance. We're concerned about the value of the property. So that may, that is just something to be aware of. They do ask, when you're selling a condo, they do ask if there is a special assessment happening. So just something to keep in mind. Special assessments, they're not happy things. If you're living in a condo, nobody wants to have a special assessment done, but they may sometimes be necessary. So as long as you're aware, the HOA boards are, trying to be responsible with the finances, it can be a necessary fix. And the way I like to think about it is that, if you live in a single family home and you need to get a roof replaced, that's just all on you, right? And so that's something that you would need to take care of anyway. So it's a good way to just kind of think about that as necessary evil. Okay, so that concludes the topic for today of special assessments. And I hope that you'll continue to find these helpful and continue to tune in for future videos of the ABCs of HOAs, and that all of this information will help you be more aware as sellers, as buyers, as owners, and that you can enjoy your condo living.